It was 3:17 in the morning and I had chest pain. I picked up the phone. I called Roberto. Nothing. I called Claudia. Nothing. I called Henrique. Nothing. 3 children. 3 calls. Silence. And the only thought I could manage at 87 years old with a pain I didn't know how to name was this: I don't want to bother anyone. It wasn't abandonment. It was worse than that. I was the one who had built that silence myself, brick by brick, over 50 years, and I only understood it lying alone in the dark, waiting for daylight. I called 3 times. 3 children, 3 calls. No one answered. It was 3:17 in the morning, and I was lying in the same bedroom where I had slept for 42 years, with a pain in my chest I couldn't name. Whether it was my heart, my blood pressure, or just the weight of 87 years settling into a single bed that had become a single bed after Geraldo died. The pain was dull, persistent, the kind that doesn't scream but doesn't stop either. And the only thought I could form, the only thought circling in my head at 3:17 that August morning was this: I don't want to bother anyone. 87 years old, an entire life given away, 3 children raised, 7 grandchildren, 40 years in the classroom, a husband buried in 1997, and on the one night I truly needed someone to answer the phone, I lay alone in the dark, weighing whether the pain I felt was reason enough to wake someone up, wondering if I was overreacting, thinking maybe it would pass, that I shouldn't do this over something so small. I stayed like that until 5:30 in the morning. The pain went away on its own. I never told anyone. Let me tell you how I got here. Not as an example of what to do. Not as some useful warning. More like a confession. Because I carried this for too long. And at this point in life, the only luxury I have left is honesty. I was born in 1937 in a small town in the countryside of Minas Gerais that no longer exists under that name. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and where roles were handed out before you were old enough to question them. Men worked outside the home. Women took care of things. A woman who didn't take care of things was not considered a decent woman. I learned that by watching my mother, watching my grandmother, watching the women next door. None of them taught it with words. They taught it with their bodies, with constant movement, with the fact that none of them was ever still, and none of them ever asked for anything. A woman who asked was looked at with a mixture of pity and contempt. So I didn't ask. I never learned how. I met Geraldo in 1957 at a June festival. He was tall, with an easy smile, and he had this way of looking at me as if I were the most important thing in the room. We got married in 1959. I was 22 and thought I knew everything. I was an elementary school teacher for 23 years at the municipal school in the town where we lived our whole lives. I taught 6 and 7-year-old children who sometimes came in with dirty uniforms and empty stomachs. And I would buy bread at the bakery on the corner with my own salary because I couldn't teach a hungry child. Geraldo never knew that. He would have thought it was wasteful, but for me, it was the only way I could get through the day. Roberto was born in 1961, Claudia in 1963, Enrique in 1966. 3 children in 5 years, and Geraldo on the road for weeks at a time because his job as a driver demanded it. So I stayed with the children, with the school, with the house, with the bills, with the fevers in the middle of the night, and the meetings in the morning and dinner in the evening. I didn't complain. Complaining wasn't in my nature. I solved things, wrote down what needed to be solved later, and kept going. I'm not saying it was wrong. I'm saying it was the only way I knew how to exist. It was in 1969 that Nyusa moved into the house next door. She came from the countryside of Paraná with her husband, 2 small children, and a Singer sewing machine that worked all day long. She sewed for other people, had clients, earned her own money before that was common. Nyusa had a laugh you could hear from the street. The women in the neighborhood thought she was rude. I thought she was free. We became friends the way women become friends when they live side by side for decades, without ceremony, without grand declarations, simply by showing up. She helped me with the children when I needed it. I helped her with the sewing when she had a big order. We traded food. We argued sometimes. We continued. What intrigued me about Nyusa, and if I'm honest, what bothered me sometimes, was how calmly she said no. Her oldest son would invite her to dinner on a Friday. She would go if she could, and if she couldn't, she would say, "This Friday won't work, sweetheart," without any guilt, without spending the whole weekend making up for it. Her daughter would ask her to watch the grandchildren on Saturday. She would go if she wanted to, and if she didn't, she would explain that she had plans. Plans. Nyusa had plans. She had an embroidery group. She had trips scheduled. She had her own time as if it truly belonged to her. I looked at that with a mixture of admiration and judgment. Sometimes I thought, what a brave woman. Other times I thought, how selfish. It depended on the day, on how tired I was, on how much of myself I had given that week without anyone noticing. But I never said no, not to anything, not to anyone. When Roberto called asking to borrow money that never came back, though neither of us mentioned it, I sent it. When Claudia showed up with suitcases after a fight with her husband, I prepared the room without asking how long she would stay. When Henrique moved apartments 3 times in 4 years, I helped with every move. At 68, at 70, at 71. Carrying boxes of books and pans and dishes wrapped in newspaper, then going home with my back aching and saying nothing because Henrique needed help and I could help. And here is the seed of it all. Not the sacrifice itself. I made those sacrifices with an open heart, and I would make them again. The seed was the silence I wrapped around every single thing I gave. I never let it show that it cost me something. I never showed that I was tired. I never said, "This time I can't," or "This time I need you to be the one who shows up." Every time someone asked how I was, when they asked, because sometimes weeks went by without anyone asking, I answered, "Fine, fine," before they even finished the sentence. I spent decades teaching my children that I didn't need anything, that I was always fine, that I could handle everything, that asking for help was something done by people who couldn't cope. And they learned. They were attentive students. 40 years in the classroom, and the most effective lesson I ever taught was that one, and I hadn't even meant to teach it. On the night of August 14, 2023, at 3:17 in the morning, lying with chest pain in the bedroom that had become too big after Geraldo died, I reaped what I had sown. Around that same time, Niusa had her youngest son living in the same building as her, not because she asked, because he wanted to be close. I stared at the ceiling until morning came. Geraldo died in March of 1997, a stroke, fast, without warning, without goodbye. On Monday, he was home complaining that the coffee was too strong. On Thursday, he was in the hospital. On Friday, he was buried. I was 60. The children were in their 20s and 30s, adults, with their own lives, their own apartments, their own problems. And in the first few days after the funeral, while I swept the house that suddenly felt too large and too quiet, I decided I would not become a burden to them. That was the decision. It didn't feel like a decision at the time. It felt like dignity. It felt like strength. It felt like this is how it's done. But it was a decision, and it changed everything that came after. I got up early every day. I cooked. I cleaned. I paid my bills with my teacher's pension, which was small but enough if I was careful. When the children called and asked how I was, I said, fine, fine. And they believed me because I had spent my whole life being the kind of woman who was fine. No one became suspicious. Why would they? I had never shown them otherwise. About 2 months after Geraldo died, Roberto called to say he needed financial help. He was opening a small business, a beverage distributor, and needed working capital. He asked me for 8,000 reais. In 1997, 8,000 reais was a lot of money for a retired teacher. I didn't have 8,000 reais in the bank, but I had Geraldo's wedding ring. He wore a 24-karat gold band, thicker than mine, which stayed in a little wooden box in the dresser drawer after the funeral. I went to a jewelry store downtown, a place that smelled of floor wax and had display cases lit with cold light. The man behind the counter weighed the ring, pushed his glasses up his nose, and said, 340 reais. 340 reais. The ring Geraldo had married me with. The ring he had worn for 38 years. The ring that was on his hand when he died. 340 reais. I said, all right, and signed the receipt. That money became part of what I sent to Roberto. I combined it with what I had saved and made up the full amount. Roberto said thank you and promised he would pay it back as soon as the business stabilized. The business closed 2 years later. The money never came back. Neither of us ever mentioned it. To this day, Roberto doesn't know where part of that money came from. And that is the point. That is the domino. Because I could have told him. I could have said, son, I sold your father's wedding ring to help you. Please carry that with you. It didn't have to be an accusation. It could have simply been the truth. But I didn't say it. Because telling him would have meant showing the cost. It would have meant giving weight to what I had given. And I had decided that what I gave could not have weight, because weight turns into guilt, and guilt turns into debt. And I didn't want my children to feel indebted to me. I wanted them to love me freely, without owing me anything. What I didn't understand was that love, when reciprocity is never taught, turns into habit. It turns into expectation. It turns into the way things work, period. Claudia was the one who needed me the most over the years, and the one who least notices it now. Her first marriage ended in 2001. She showed up at my door with 2 suitcases and Fernanda, who was 4 years old, crying in her arms. I opened the door, put Fernanda in the back room I had already prepared for visitors, warmed up some soup, and didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. She stayed for 8 months. 8 months with Fernanda in my house, eating at my table, using the bathroom that had only one working hot shower because the other had been broken for months and I hadn't called the plumber yet. 8 months of breakfast made, of taking Fernanda to school when Claudia had job interviews, of electricity and water bills being shared without ever being discussed because I didn't want to discuss them. When Claudia left, she said, "Mom, I'll never forget what you did for me." And I said, "Don't talk like that, sweetheart. That's what I'm here for." I should have kept my mouth shut because what I said in that moment, "That's what I'm here for," wasn't humility. It was an instruction. I was teaching her that what I did was a role, not an effort, that it didn't cost me anything, that it was my nature, and she absorbed it. In 2007, Claudia called asking me to take care of Fernanda, who was already 10, for 3 weeks while she and her second husband went on a trip. I took care of her. In 2009, I asked Claudia to come with me to a cardiologist appointment because some of my test results were off and I was afraid to go alone. She said she would try, but she had an important work meeting and maybe Roberto could go instead. Roberto couldn't go either. I went alone. The doctor explained that it was high blood pressure, manageable with medication. He told me not to overdo it with salt. I wrote everything down on a folded piece of paper that is still in the kitchen drawer. I took a taxi home. I made lunch. I didn't tell anyone I had gone alone. I told them I was fine, that it was nothing serious. Fine. Enrique was the youngest, and the one who reminded me most of Geraldo when he smiled. He became an engineer, lived in Sao Paulo for 10 years, then moved back to town with his wife and 2 small children. When he came back, I helped renovate their apartment, not with money, because I didn't have much anymore, but with my presence, choosing tiles, dealing with the workers, waiting in the empty apartment for the carpenter who showed up 3 hours late. The week Enrique went back to work after the move, his wife called and asked if I could stay with the boys because the babysitter had canceled at the last minute. I went. Of course I went. I enjoy being with my grandchildren. That's true. I'm not complaining about my grandchildren. What I'm saying is that there was never a call in the other direction. Never. "Mom, are you okay? Do you need anything? We'll stop by this week." I was in my 70s. My knees were bad. My blood pressure was always fluctuating, and I had been sleeping poorly for a long time. No one asked. And then came the moment that hurts me more than anything else I've told you. One Sunday afternoon, it must have been 2015 or 2016, I'm not exactly sure. An ordinary Sunday, no special occasion. All the children had come over for lunch, with the grandchildren and the daughters-in-law. I had woken up at 7 in the morning to make roast chicken with farofa, rice, beans, salad, and the cornmeal cake Enrique had loved since childhood. A table for 8 people. Me alone in the kitchen since early morning. We had lunch together. There was laughter, conversation. Roberto arguing politics with Enrique, who argued back. Claudia had brought wine. The grandchildren ran around the apartment. It was a normal family lunch, the kind that looks like happiness in a photograph. When the table started being cleared, when the plates were stacked, when it became obvious that someone would have to wash all of it, I got up and went to the kitchen. I washed everything alone. Not because everyone had left. They were all in the living room. I could hear the television, the soccer game Roberto had turned on, the grandchildren talking, Enrique opening another beer. No one came into the kitchen. No one asked if I needed help. No one even looked through the doorway. And what kills me, what truly kills me when I think about it, is not the lack of consideration. It's that I wasn't surprised. I didn't feel angry. I washed the dishes on autopilot, like someone carrying out a task that naturally belonged to her, because it did. It was my nature. I had built that with decades of patience and silence and fine. They hadn't abandoned me that Sunday. They had simply continued being exactly what I had taught them to be. Around that same time, Noosa had her youngest son over for dinner every week. He called before coming to ask what she needed from the grocery store. He stayed afterward to help wash the dishes. Not because Noosa was more loved than I was, because Noosa had never pretended she didn't need anyone. I am not angry at my children. It took me a long time to arrive at that sentence. I spent quite a while angry, yes, waking up in the middle of the night with that dull anger that has nowhere to go, thinking about the unanswered phone, the dishes, the years of a wedding ring sold and silence bought. Anger is easier. Anger has an address. You point at someone and say, "It was you." But the truth that hurt in a way anger never did, is that I know exactly where it came from. And it came from me. Not because I was a bad mother. Not because I didn't love them. I loved them with everything I had, and I still do. But love without honesty is a kind of lie. And I lied to my children for 50 years. I lied with my silence. I lied with my fine. I lied with the ease with which I appeared for others and disappeared from my own problems. As if I had no problems. As if I were made of different material. I taught them I was unbreakable, and they believed it because it was convenient to believe it. I am not blaming them. I am describing it, because the blame is mine, and that is the hardest and most honest thing I have ever said in my life. You, listening to me now, I don't know how old you are. Maybe you're young. Maybe you're the child of someone like me, someone who always said, fine, and never asked for anything and was always there when people needed them. And maybe you're thinking, my mother is like that. My father is like that. They never complain, never ask, never need anything. They do need things. They have simply learned, as I learned, that asking is weakness. That being a bother is wrong, that the love of children does not need reciprocity, only presence, and their presence is enough. It is not enough. Think of something simple. When was the last time you called her? Not to ask for anything, not to tell her anything, just to ask how she was and actually wait for the answer. Not the automatic answer, not the fine, she'll give in the first 5 seconds, but the answer that might come after, if you waited. The last time someone asked me how I was, truly, without rushing, waiting for the answer, was in October of 2021. It was Noosa. She came over for coffee and stayed for 2 hours. She asked if I was sleeping well, if my blood pressure was under control, if I was afraid of anything. She stayed quiet while I answered. She didn't offer solutions. She simply stayed. It was the most important conversation I had had in years. With my best friend, not with any of my 3 children. I knew every grandchild's birthday. I knew who was dating, who had changed jobs, who was having marital problems. I knew everything about everyone. And no one knew anything about me because I never told them, and because they never asked enough to find out on their own. We arrived here together, me building it, them living inside it, neither side knowing what we were doing. There is something I want to tell you, not as a warning, as what it is, a request. If your mother is still alive, if she is still somewhere, in an apartment, in a house, in a room, call her today, not tomorrow, today. And when she says, fine, because she will, insist. Say, I know you're fine, but how are you really? And wait. Maybe she'll start talking. Maybe she'll fall silent because she isn't used to it. Maybe she'll cry, and if she does, let her. Maybe she'll say she is afraid of aging, of loneliness, of becoming a burden. All the things I never said because I learned they weren't to be said. You don't have to fix it. You just have to listen. Because what we need most at this age is not a solution. It is someone who arrives and asks without already being on their way out. I can't go back. I can't undo 50 years of strategic silence. I can't get Geraldo's wedding ring back. I can't make that chest pain in August of 2023 not have happened the way it happened, alone, at 3:17 in the morning, weighing whether it was worth bothering my children. But you still have time. Tell me in the comments, do you remember the last time you truly asked how she was? Because I needed someone to have asked, and I think she needs it too.